What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over the comic books I picked up this Wednesday, give you my impressions on what they're all about, and whether there's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. To start off things, I'm going to be going over Venom number 4. So Venom number 4 is unfortunately probably the last book that I'm going to be picking up in this series in print, simply because it doesn't really offer a whole heck of a lot for me in terms of the character. What we run into is the fact that the one interesting thing about this particular storyline is the fact that there was going to be kind of a combative nature between Venom the symbiote and Lee Price, the kind of owner of this symbiote at this point in time, and unfortunately that's just kind of something that they're stuffing to the wayside. As Lee kind of takes more possession over the symbiote, it kind of gets a little bit more dull, and it's nowhere near as intelligent as it was, so there is the tease of the potential return of Eddie Brock or Flash Thompson, probably Eddie Brock because he lost his toxin symbiote in the Carnage storyline, to the ownership of Venom, but I don't know if that's going to be too little too late, or if it's going to be just enough to kind of bring me back on into the series. For a book that had a lot of potential, unfortunately it's just not going where I want it to go, and that's really a downer. Next, we're going to be talking about Spider-Man number 13. So this continues the Sitting in a Tree storyline, which is a crossover between Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales' Spider-Man. And what I like in this is that Spider-Gwen is the ass-kicker out of the group. You know, Miles is just kind of overwhelmed by the fact that he's confronted with his dad, or at least his dad from a parallel universe, and it makes it very frustrating for him. I do kind of really dislike the trope that Brian Michael Bendis is putting this through, where this has already happened to Miles, so with no consequences, there's no potential pitfalls of Miles or Gwen. You realize that these two have made it through this entire ordeal, and there's no sense of drama that's really associated with it. It's really just more of a relay of information, which finds myself being kind of frustrated at the actual fact of that. Overall, it's still something that I'm not necessarily super excited about, but hopefully it's going to bring out some more development for both of those characters. At least that's what I'm really hoping for. Next, we have Green Arrow number 17, so this continues the Emerald Outlaw story arc, where we finally see this kind of conflict between Malcolm Merlyn as well as Oliver Queen, and, you know, there's a lot of different stuff that's going on, the whole backstory with the whole Ninth Circle, and how they're kind of taking over things, particularly with the election of the new mayor, just really makes the situation really frustrating for Oliver Queen, who doesn't really have a lot of the resources that are really expected. There's a really touching moment at the beginning of this where they're commemorating the life and the kind of legacy that's left behind by the police chief that was reluctantly helping the Green Arrow, but there's a really big twist at the end, which is going to kind of change the entire team dynamics. I'm really excited to see where this goes, even though Green Arrow's been kind of falling to the bottom of the list of the books that I'm picking up as far as interest level, but it's still enough to grab me. Another book that's unfortunately made its way to the bottom of my pickup list is Mother Panic, so issue number 3 is good, but the unfortunate thing is that the entire first series of issues, issue number 1, 2, and 3, has really led up to this sort of validation by the Gotham superheroes that Mother Panic has the opportunity to kind of be a hero in their jurisdiction. You know, she's kind of perceiving herself as this kind of tool of vengeance, whereas Batwoman kind of comes into the fray, kind of gets her little ass kicked by the cybernetic enhancements that are associated with Mother Panic and all these kind of things, but ultimately validates her existence, which I would have much rather seen her be a little bit more rogue, not necessarily have them be as perceptive, have her be a little bit more stealthy in that respect, and then not necessarily kind of accept that validation. She doesn't really care herself, but I didn't really feel the need to kind of put that into the story to kind of validate her existence inside of Gotham. But overall, it's still not really a particularly bad book, and ultimately the mature content that's really associated with it is kind of toned down compared to, say, the first issue or so. But there was a really kind of weird scene where there was melting children, so, if you're into that kind of stuff, it's okay. As far as the kind of remainder story, the secondary story regarding the Gotham Radio, that is a really cool one that's kind of keeping me gripped, so I'm really excited about where that one goes too. Next, we're going to dip into Daredevil number 17, so this continues the story, or at least this is the beginning of the story, of how Matt Murdock reclaimed his identity, and it dips back into his entire San Francisco backstory, which I don't really have a whole heck of a lot of knowledge on, but it's really entertaining to see this told from his perspective at this point in time. And it doesn't get into the point where we know how he's gotten these things done, because he's seeked out everybody that he possibly could, even going so far as to inquire about Mephisto and what he might be able to do for a deal. The unfortunate thing about this is that it's just the beginning of this whole thing, and then compared to, say, the other books, I'm really much more intrigued by Bullseye number 1 as well as by Kingpin number 1, because they're telling such a dynamic story in that respect, where this is more of like, this is how things came to be. It's informative, and I'm really excited about that, and I really hope that the overall Running with the Devil series based around these, 3 or 4 books is really going to be particularly exciting, because I'm kind of I'm kind of up on where Kingpin's at. I'm really up on where Bullseye's at. I haven't even had a chance to pick up Elektra yet, but I'm really excited to see where that one kind of flows. And I like the idea of these 3-4 books interweaving into their own individual stories and really kind of livening up the Daredevil universe. Next, we're going to talk about Nightwing number 15, so this continues on with the Bloodhaven arc, but it's really more of a conclusion because this is date night for Dick and Sean, and it's a holdover. It's a holdover issue that is full of romance and intrigue. Not necessarily intrigue, but it's full of those things that kind of make these individual characters much more compelling. So there's a lot of kind of character development for Dick Grayson as Nightwing in this particular universe, as well as for Defacer. Sean Sang gets a whole lot more depth. She gets parents, she gets a backstory, she gets an entire emotional motivation for how she was her character in the previous arcs that were associated with Defacer, and it was really compelling to see where those things go, ultimately before you get your ending, which is going to lead directly into the next story arc. And I find that is a really good point in time. If people want to jump onto these things, the next issue, Nightwing number 16, is going to lead you in a whole bunch of different directions, and a lot of the stuff from the previous issues is completely wrapped up. And if you were looking for closure for the first 2 or 3 story arcs and a few loose ends, this is the book that kind of gave it to you. So overall, it's a really good capstone on the early part of the Nightwing run, so I was really happy where it's at. Another kind of capstone piece is Old Man Logan number 18. So this continues the current storyline, which is kind of bouncing Old Man Logan between space as well as the wasteland that he wasn't necessarily sure he was a part of, and he really feels his sense of obligation to go back to the wasteland and kind of rescue this child that he left behind in this alternate reality, this alternate future. So this is a really interesting perspective on these things. The big thing is that as far as these books go, Sorrentino's art has been a really big draw. He has done some fantastic work as far as this kind of really odd but very artistic basis. And there's a full 2-page splash of Jean Grey, that's just red and crimson and, it's gritty and it's super cool that I really appreciated in this book. And what we're going to see is we're probably going to see a transition to a new artist because Sorrentino's been associated with a few different works, so I don't necessarily know if he can keep working on Old Man Logan. So this is one of those situations where this might not necessarily be the same book within a month or two that it is right now. You're still going to get the same great writing because Jeff Lemire's been doing a really good job on this, and he's not going to be leaving this anytime soon. However, if you're here for the combination of writing and the artistic style, well, you're probably going to have to see what the next artist is going to be doing in the future to see if it's something you want to continue with. And now a book I can't help but continue with is Invincible Iron Man number 4. So Invincible Iron Man and me, we've had kind of a love and hate relationship. I really like the character of Riri Williams, I really like the setting that's associated with it, but I don't like the way that the story has been unfolding. It feels like it doesn't necessarily work for me logically. And now we can kind of see where all these kind of pieces that were jumbled up and that didn't feel like they're in the right order are starting to kind of click because we are firmly in the action that's associated with Riri Williams and her character. Because that's the case, what we do is we get to see her stripped of her armor and we get to dive into her intellect a little bit more. And ultimately what she does is she uses that same kind of brilliance that's associated with Tony Stark and kind of puts it into practice as far as its, her problem-solving capabilities. And because of that, what she does is she immediately inside of her head determines what she's going to be able to do and then confronts Tony Stark AI in a laptop, that she borrowed off of somebody that was really worried about hiding his porn. It really kind of brings about her sense of genius, and it's just like, hey, you already developed this, right? And he's like, well, yeah, but I don't know how to get it there. So she borrows an old Iron Man armor, sends it over kind of like his bait in order to plant these things. But we don't necessarily know if that has been successful at this point in time, but it really kind of gets to the heart of who Riri is as a character. Before she ever started building her own armor, she was a genius, and that is one of the most important things to remember about this. She's not just some sort of Iron Man replacement. She is her own unique, independent person, and seeing her come up with problem solving in a very different manner than what Tony Stark might have been. Tony Stark, he's a very brilliant person, but a lot of the times he would be a brute force kind of measure and have very clever tricks up his sleeve, whereas she is looking at thinking her way around the problems because she doesn't really have any kind of experience in fighting in battle. So I'm really excited to see where that goes, and I feel like if Brian Michael Bendis continues to develop the character in that respect, that it's going to be a much better book than it has been, and it hasn't been bad to begin with, so that just makes it great. However, there is a book that's been excellent almost all the way through, and that is Trinity. So in Trinity number 6, we finally see the conclusion of this whole Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman kind of story arc, as well as Poison Ivy and Mongol. And overall, I don't want to spoil too much. It seems like a relatively contrived ending, but it wasn't anything that I found that really kind of frustrated me to any point. It's just like, okay, so this is naturally what's going to have to happen. I like how everything really unfolded. It was very convenient in terms of some of the endings, but it's still one of those things where this is not necessarily a cliffhanger. It's not supposed to be suspenseful. It's not supposed to be a twist. It's very much a warm and fuzzy situation, and the fact that everybody kind of ends up on the same page as friends, really, it should lay the groundwork for the rest of the DC universe as to the relationship that Bruce and Clark and Diana should be having going forward. They are the Trinity. They should be friends. They should be able to kind of tackle anything that they possibly need to together, because they are the greatest of the great in terms of what DC has to offer as far as superheroes. So while it wasn't necessarily the most exciting, climactic kind of ending, it was definitely one that was very fulfilling and rewarding from an emotional perspective. But if you wanted something with a little bit more action in your diet, you would be talking about Gamora. So Gamora number 3 continues on the story of how she's on Ubalex, seeking out this last princess of the Badoon. So she's a half-princess from a concubine of the Badoon royalty line. So Gamora, who has already saved her once at this point in time, is kind of been captured by this cult that worships the black hole that is really going to suck the life out of Ubalex within the next day or so. And then finally we find a confrontation where, she finally figures out that this is the person that she's been hunting for. The one that she saved previously, this is who she's really hunting for, and that's who she needs to kill. And you'd wonder, it's like, because she kind of showed her this whole kind of merciful, like, savior aspect to begin with, is she going to be kind of like, remorseful? Nope. She is just straight up no mercy on this. It's like, I'm going to kill you anyway. It's like, this is going to be the situation. Your lineage, whether you know it or not, is going to have to end with you, because that is my ultimate service to my people that are dead. There is a twist ending that kind of really reins her in that respect, and I'm really excited about that. But it does feel very convenient. Obviously everything in comic books feels a little convenient, but it's nice to see, because that way we give her the opportunity to kind of start reforming herself. She is not just a killing machine, and she can show compassion, empathy, and now she's got some people that she can connect with. Whether they live through the rest of the arc or not doesn't really matter, but she knew that she was not alone per se at this point in time. So I'm really excited about Gamora. I think Nicole Perlman's doing a really good job with it, so I can't wait to see where it's going in the future. Another book I can't wait to see where it's going in the future is Captain America. So this bad boy is just awesome. Like, I love everything about Nick Spencer's Captain America right now, and I haven't been following the other issues, which have really been tailoring a few different aspects of the story to those. I don't really, Thunderbolts isn't really my thing. The whole X-Men storyline is just like, whatever. I'm really excited by the intrigue that's associated with this, and the fact that, Steve Rogers is kind of going through all these things, and the revised history inside, Steve's melon is awesome, because it's not Erskine that kind of does everything. It's Zola. It's still full-on Hydra. That's how he can become the person that he was, becoming the greatest spy in Hydra history. The unfortunate thing is that you've got a reconciliation with what he would consider one of his best friends, and then you also have the unearthing of some evidence that is going to kind of topple everything. So this is where everything kind of gets started for Secret Empire, which has me really excited. I would love to hear that the way Marvel planned it, Civil War II was just a big smokescreen for what's going to happen in Secret Empire, even though that is completely not the case, and that was more of a cash grab kind of situation. But if everything, like the way that Nick Spencer was able to turn Steve Rogers on his ear and then carry this entire storyline all the way through a year before kind of getting to this development plot, shows everything right about what could go on with Secret Empire and what everything that was wrong with Civil War II. So I really hope this is kind of a validation, and it's one of the only major Marvel crossovers that I've been excited for in years. So I'm really excited where this one goes. And speaking of Marvel crossovers and events, we have Clone Conspiracy number 5, which was the end of Clone Conspiracy, but now there's a Clone Conspiracy Omega, and there's all kinds of different stuff that goes on in this one. And while it was just like, oh my god, with the issue number 4, it was just like, there's going to be such a climactic ending. And everything just kind of it felt a little meh. I can't really describe why it felt a little bit meh. It felt like, Gwen Stacy did the selfless thing, and there wasn't really any opportunity for her to save herself. The confrontation between Dr. Octopus is a redeeming fight for Dr. Octopus. Ben Reilly was just clinically insane, even though we know there's going to be kind of this continuing storyline that's going to be associated with that. There's just a whole lot of stuff. It's just like, okay, cool, we're just going to go through the checklist of everything that needs to happen in order for the world to go back to mostly the same. And then the real consequence would have been to be like, all right, Prowler is a limited series, and we're just going to axe him right there. Nope, we're not going to do that. There's a whole bunch of stuff that just is like, we could do all this cool stuff and like really grip at people's hearts and be like, oh my god, they actually did it, and then we're not. So it was just, it was more the same from comic books. Overall, it hasn't been a bad series, and I'm probably going to do an entire breakdown of the entire clone conspiracy at some point in time. It's just that it wasn't quite as gripping and eventful and consequential as I would have hoped. But you can't win them all. Next, we can dip into Doctor Strange number 17, and Doctor Strange 17 is pretty interesting simply because Mr. Misery is now inhabiting the body of the best friend of Doctor Strange, and that is Wong. And I really like this issue because Fraser Irving did the art for it, which is a very kind of whimsical, fantastical, very skewed version of Doctor Strange. It borders on realisms through like a haze of gauze with like a little bit of Technicolor in there. It's not quite as out there as Chris Botchlow's art, but it's definitely a much more grounded but fantastical version of these things. And if you remember, Fraser Irving actually did the untold story, the secret origin of Mjolnir in Mighty Thor number 12, I believe it was. And he's done a few other things as well, but overall, just seeing an entire issue of Doctor Strange in Fraser Irving's art, even though I do love Chris Botchlow, was fantastic. What we see as far as the story is concerned is that Mr. Misery is not going to be giving up any of his possessions, i.e. Wong, anytime soon, and then he's got a plan to make Doctor Strange feel pretty goddamn terrible, and it's just like, oh man, what he does to these people, you're going to have to see it in order to believe it, and Doctor Strange continues to establish itself as one of the best, if not the best, Marvel title out right now. I'm really, really digging on Doctor Strange, and at issue number 17, that's a pretty rare thing to see. Now with some more Marvel, let's talk about Ultimate Squared number 4. So this is more Marvel cosmic slop written by Al Ewing. And Al has a very interesting idea as to what's exactly going on. So what he's basically done is he took the Marvel Cosmic Universe and threw it into a giant meat grinder, and we're trying to figure out exactly what he's making here. Is he making hamburgers? Is he making sausage? Is there something else that's going to be coming out of this? Because essentially he killed off the Living Tribunal, he combined the powers of order and chaos through the In-Betweener to create this new character, Logos, which is not necessarily a judge. He is imposing his will on the Marvel Cosmic Universe. We also have the things that might be this kind of Never Queen or whatever. He goes out to obliterate the Celestials. There's so much stuff that's going on, which is just hugely consequential and completely inconsequential in the rest of the Marvel continuity. He's just playing in this sandbox with toys that impact the Marvel Universe on a cosmic scale, and yet nobody can feel the ripples of at this point in time, except for the Ultimates. And the Ultimates have their own problems with the Troubleshooters, which is really kind of, okay, sure. The whole kind of guy that has the similar powers to America Chavez and how she operates and those kind of things. It's really interesting to see how those things go back and forth, but he's just kind of like, hey man, I think the spaghetti's done, I'm just going to throw it at the wall, see if it sticks, and whatever stays up there is what's going to happen. It's really kind of chaotic, which is awesome, but it's very easy to get confused in this respect. I'm a little bit off on Travel Foreman's art. It doesn't quite do it for me, but it's more than enough. It's one of those situations where I love the book enough and I like the content enough that I'm going to stick with it, even though the art might be a little bit less than what I expected, especially after having Kenneth Rocafort for the first series. Still a book that I recommend to everybody. Then, after the Multiplicity storyline, we're going to have to talk about Superman. So in Superman number 17, we have a pretty cool setup. It's just a simple one-shotty kind of deal that's associated with Dead Man's Swamp. So this is an adventure purely for John and his little girlfriend, and they kind of adventure out into the swamp. They get kind of sucked up in these hallucinatory kind of bog gases. They get stalked by this giant black entity. The cows and everybody starts mutating, and they're in this old house, and they hide in the... It's a really entertaining kind of horror-inspired story, like a scary story, like Goosebumps or something like that. Something from R.L. Stine, even though he's going to be at Marvel next month. It's definitely a very cool story, and I was really inspired by what this did and what kind of story it told. It was really not what I expected at all, and it really gave me second thoughts about Mr. Cobb, the grandfather of the young girl. He always seems to be in these various situations, whether it's shooting Frankenstein with a shotgun or, rescuing John after he's fallen out of a tree or, coming to get the cow out of the swamp. Mr. Cobb is in the middle of everything, and it makes me feel like he is not exactly who he seems to be. So that is a plot line that I'm going to be looking for in the future. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something, but we're going to find out at some point in time. Next, we have Mighty Thor number 16, and Mighty Thor number 16 starts the Challenge of the Gods. So this is gods competing on god levels regarding things that gods do. And these Shi'ar gods are arrogant, asshole kind of people. They're just like, oh my god, they're so beneath me. And it seems really kind of interesting. They even go so far as an acolyte like Guardian and just smash the crap out of him because he apologizes to a lesser god. And that was just seen as disrespectful. They go about almost a mass slaughtering of their own people in order to ensure that they are prayed to get the most prayers, and that's the point scoring system. And, ultimately Thor is not necessarily that kind of god, so she goes out and she does what she does. So while these things are taking place, we also see Sif in the Warriors 3, or however many warriors there are at this point in time, taking on Kull and really kind of getting up his ire so that way he wants to go and battle to take on these Shi'ar, to go get Thor. And that's where we're going to start the real heart of the Asgard-Shi'ar war. While Thor and the deities of the Shi'ar Empire are really battling on a much higher plane of existence comparatively, we're going to see the Asgard take on the Shi'ar at their own home turf. So that's going to be pretty interesting. Overall, I like it. Jason Aaron does a really good job with Thor, and it's very interesting at this point in time. So I can't wait to see where this kind of unravels. Then from Image, we can dip into God Country number 2, which has this whole Savage Dragon kind of variant cover, which I had to pick up because it's badass. And we see what Emmett is all about. And Emmett is all about keeping the memories and the life that he has regained, even though it's a situation where he remembers all the painful things, he remembers all the good things, but the sword has its own kind of will. It is the god of swords. It's not just the god of war, like who comes down to try and confront Emmett, but it is the god of swords who chooses his wielder, the god of blades. So this is really kind of an exposition story. It's really about what the blades are about, what Emmett is really remembering, how he kind of connects with his family, and then how he confronts the god of war at this point in time, and what kind of message he sends back to the kind of, call it the Zeus-like figure, that kind of guy. The king of Olympus back out in space, whatever they're going to be perceiving as a god. And Emmett is just down home country Texas, you want my sword, come and take it. And this just means that I'm going to love this book so much more. I like the idea of an old man in Texas that has Alzheimer's, and he only reclaims himself when he's holding a sword, so he's just walking around Texas with a giant-ass godly sword. It just seems ridiculous and amazing at the same time. I'm really excited about God Country, and it's been a really good beginning. I can't wait to see where it goes. Another particularly good beginning was in Batman, and Batman number 17 continues on with the same thing, and while we don't get any real kind of sense of where things are going as far as Batman's concerned, we see, Jason Todd, we see Dick Grayson, we see Damian in the Fortress of Solitude because they're evidently recovering in some sort of stasis pod from their injuries that they were sustained. It doesn't really answer any questions whatsoever as to why these things happened, how they happened. How the hell did Bane even get into the goddamn Batcave? It's just ridiculous in every single aspect. And then we see this kind of espionage, spy-like plot where Alfred is a phenomenal actor. He could have done wonderful things with Lear, and that just establishes Alfred as one of the best characters in the entire Batman book that Tom King is writing. But then we finally see where this confrontation is going to go. Bane's back on the Venom, and there's a lot of different people that he's taken out in order to kind of give Batman pause in respect to these things. These are people that he cares about, and how far is he going to let Bane get without giving Bane what he wants? So it's setting up a real big confrontation as far as what's going to be happening at Arkham Asylum. So it's definitely just the beginning of this. We haven't cut to any kind of twists and whatnot. But since we're on issue 17, that means we've got 18, 19, and 20 in order to finish this out. So there's probably going to be a hell of a lot that's going to happen in those next few issues. Now we can dip and dive into new number ones, and I'm going to start off with Batwoman Rebirth. So this is a backstory of Kate Kane, and if you're looking for any kind of information regarding the character of Batwoman or who she was as a person beforehand, this is the book for you. So Marguerite Bennett, James Tynion IV, as well as Stephen Epting did a fantastic job with this, and this is a must-read book for anybody that wants to know a little bit more about Batwoman or how this story is really going to unfold in her own individual title. I was really surprised by what was presented here, and I was really excited after I finished it because of everything they told me about this character that was, common knowledge if you've been following along from the beginning, but it really is probably one of the better introductions to the individual characters that I have seen out of any of the Rebirth titles. Definitely in the line of where Killer Frost was and the Ray and all that kind of stuff for the Justice League of America stuff, but better. It was awesome. I love this book. Definitely go out and read it. It's probably going to catch your interest and be another Bat book that you're going to pick up, even though I picked them all up anyway. The next number one is going to be Super Sons number one, so this is the Dustin Nguyen variant cover, and I like it because Dustin does a fantastic job on Descender, and his watercolors are great. But what this one does is it brings Peter J. Tomasi and Jorge Jimenez to the front lines with basically Damian and Jonathan. So Peter J. Tomasi writes those characters really well, and while this first issue it's good, it's not quite what I was expecting. I thought that it would be a little bit more like people, like boys in training versus, kids that are off doing their own thing, doing no good, kind of sneaking out late at night kind of situations. I thought it was going to be a bit more mentorship for the beginning, but now that I kind of see where it's going, I'm really entertained, especially by the end of the book. But if you have any kind of inkling to read this, or you have any kind of interest in Jonathan Kent or Jonathan White or Damian and how they're kind of going to grow as characters together, this is the book to read. You've got a much more experienced character in Damian that's going to be kind of quasi-mentoring John, who's got a much different moral compass, and they're both going to impact each other in great ways, and I can't wait to see how those things develop, because that's going to be the heart and soul of this book, how these two characters kind of influence each other to become better people, become better heroes, and eventually take over the mantles of their parents. So I'm really excited to see where that goes, and hopefully a lot of you out there are as well. And then to finish things up from DC and our new number ones, we're going to be talking about the Wildstorm. So Warren Ellis has taken the creation of Jim Lee and he's kind of reintroducing it into the DC universe. And this is a super intro issue. If you have no idea what the Wildstorm is about, after this issue, you still probably have no idea what the Wildstorm is about. However, it introduces great characters, it introduces different organizations. The introduction of Engineer was fantastic. The organization of I.O., Halo, all of it is just, there's so much to sink your teeth into as far as backstory that hasn't been really exposed at this point in time. And then you've got the idea of Voodoo, who understands how this is kind of impacted in various other things. She references a Manhattan, basically a Manhattan alleyway, where a man turned into a bat in 1939, which is clearly an homage to the introduction of Batman in the DC universe. So we have to remember that after Flashpoint combined the Vertigo universe, the Wildstorm universe, as well as the DC universe into what we now know as the New 52, and then eventually to where we're at in Rebirth. So the reintroduction of these characters, the Titans are going to be in New York. They're going to be out there. This is all happening on the same level as what happens in Superman, what happens in Batman, and it's going to be interesting how these things unfold as they get impacted by various other things, and yet stay uniquely themselves. I'm really excited about the Wildstorm. It's something that I wasn't anticipating being excited about, but I like the fact that everything's being told in a very different direction, and it's very non-traditional in terms of superhero fare, which is one of the more exciting things about comic books these days. Definitely recommend picking up the Wildstorm and putting your own opinion into that, because it's one of those things where you can kind of absorb, interpret, and then relay your kind of own emotions and feelings about it, and I really am excited about where the Wildstorm goes. So those are all the books that I picked up this Wednesday, but I want to know what you guys grabbed too, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.